Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is James.
My name is Matt.
And on today's episode, we are trying to find hope in a dystopian world. And to do that, we are looking at the film Children of Men from 2006. Do you think we're going to find hope, Matt?
I'm confident we're going to find hope, but you've got to bear with us because I think it's going to be a bit of a slog getting there.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to trawl through some depressing dystopian topics, as has become the trend for this series on the podcast. And we're not doing it alone. We're not going into these dark, murky, dystopian waters on our own. We're also joined by a guest this week, aren't we, Matt?
Yeah, Rhianna Dhillon, friend of the show and broadcaster, is joining us once again to talk about Children of Men on today's episode. Shall we join Rhianna and start finding the hope, James?
Yes, let's do it.
I can't really remember when I last had any hope. And I certainly can't remember when anyone else did either. Because really, since women stopped being able to have babies, what's left to hope for?
The ultimate mystery. Why are women infertile? Some say it's genetic experiments, pollution. Why do you think we can't make babies anymore?
Doesn't matter. It's all over in 50 years. It's too late.
Move along! Move along!
Your baby is the miracle the whole world has been waiting for.
We will find a way to get you to the Human Project, I promise you.
So, co-host of the Radio Times podcast, film critic for 6 Music and 5 Live, and friend of this podcast, Rhianna Dhillon, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us again. It's always good to have you on.
It's lovely to be back. Thank you for asking me, and for such a great film as well.
Such a great film, yeah, and a little bit more hope in our series this time. We've been dealing with some rather heavy concepts this series, Rhianna. It's been a little bit heavy going at times.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's a dark time all round.
Yes, months and months of watching dystopian films,
yeah,
full of depressing images. And I mean, this has its fair share of depressing images as well.
That's just the news, right?
Yeah.
That's just the world we're living in. But like Matt said, there will be some hope at the end of this one. So yeah, looking forward to a ray of sunshine by the end of it. But to kick things off as well, Rhianna, what do you think of dystopian fiction itself? Like, do you have any favourites? What do you think about it as like a sort of subgenre of sci-fi?
I mean, it terrifies me, genuinely. I find it quite difficult to read. I much prefer to watch. If I read a dystopian book, I find it really difficult to shake. We'll talk about this with the film, but it becomes a world that we realise is so close to our own so often. I know you must have had this so many times when you've been doing this series, but I think it's that the depression sinks in when you realise that this isn't futuristic and this isn't another world. This is just everything that's going on, and it might not be happening to us, but it's happening in our lifetime, and it's happening to people around us, and it's happening in different countries. So that's when I think of dystopia. I think perhaps maybe 10, 20 years ago, I've had quite a different idea of what that might have been, and now I feel incredibly cynical about it being all too documentary-like, I suppose, or too close to the bone.
Do you think that's our age, or do you think that's the world we live in?
I wonder if it's us just becoming a bit more aware of the world that we live in. There are certain events that have happened since, for example, some of the most famous novels that have then been adapted were written. So, like, for example, A Handmaid's Tale or Children of Men. There are certain events that have since happened that reflect everything that's in those novels, but that doesn't mean to say that they weren't in existence already. Things like 1984 as well. These weren't just sort of conjured up. These have always been somewhere in the ether, even if it's not been in the author's immediate world, I suppose.
But it's when it's reflecting social issues that are happening within our lifetime that we read about and saw on the news, that just has a much more powerful impact, I think, doesn't it?
There is, there are those ones that are slightly more teeny, like the Hunger Games and the Divergent series, for example, which, because they have that sort of fantasy aspect, it's easy to be a bit more removed from it, and it's a bit more fun and lighthearted. So I suppose I don't really think of those as being dystopian in quite the same way, but perhaps that's me being a bit patronising to just young adult fiction, because actually when you look at it, of course it is.
And I think it's important for you, like we talked about this when we talked about Hunger Games, but it's important for young readers to read these kind of stories because they set you up to look at the world in that way as well. Because specifically the Hunger Games, I think, because it was such a popular sort of young adult book, you've got children reading that and then they grow up and they sort of like, they have a little bit of an idea about sort of the social structures that could cause a dystopia and sort of so on and so forth. So I think that's so interesting about dystopian fiction, just sort of like the way it gets you to look at the world, and especially like that's what good sci-fi does, doesn't it? Because it's all about tapping into the zeitgeist of the time and telling a story in like a quite a hard-hitting story quite often in a way which is more palatable for an audience. And I think that's what Children of Men does as well.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And I suppose the idea of power corrupting is something that is so prevalent throughout all of these stories. And that's something that you learn from a really young age about hierarchy, don't you? Even if, you could be learning about the Prime Minister when you're 5-6 years old. I had a grasp of who Margaret Thatcher was, for example, and why she was such a terrifying influence on our country, even though she was before my time. But that was, I knew that from a really young age. And so these are all, so I think you grow up with these almost not mythical figures, but these people who our parents' generation or their parent, you kind of think back to dictators that we learn about throughout all of our history lessons. It's always there. It's always there to be found in reality. And so I guess when we kind of just have that escapist spin when we read those other books that are a little bit younger, it's always recognisable, exactly as you said.
But they're probably more enjoyable, those more escapist books.
100%.
Although having said that, like I find Children of Men an incredibly enjoyable film to watch, even though it's probably the best mix of like enjoyable and difficult to watch of any film I can really think of.
Yeah, it is. I remember watching it at the time when I was 17, I guess, when it came out, 2006, and thinking I never want to watch that again because of how horribly bleak it was and dark. And actually watching it now, I just think, wow, an amazing film. And I think I could easily watch that again. It was so well made. And it's interesting how the themes, I suppose, were too much for me to handle at 17. And now I can see it as an incredible art piece as well.
I think I had a sort of similar experience with it as well, because when I watched it the first time, I knew it was a good film, but I think watching it again and being that bit older, you get a whole different perspective on it. Just like the way it looks, the way it's shot, all of the sort of elements that are going on, which you kind of like when you're younger, you don't properly sort of like clock really. Just all of the interesting stuff that they're talking about with like immigration and asylum seekers and all of this like stuff, which turns so dark in the film that I think when I watched it as a kid, I was kind of looking at the sort of like the big explosion and the action scenes and kind of all of that excitement. And you get a whole different perspective watching it with a bit more background.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like a perfectly made film. But I think when I first saw it, if you'd asked me what the film was about, I wouldn't have said it's a film about immigration. That stuff was pretty lost on me when I was younger.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I suppose I just remember the isolation. I don't remember... Well, we'll go into like how the film ends and everything, but I was sort of left with a feeling of isolation and devastation and how bleak the world was and how there wasn't any hope for humanity, which is possibly not quite the ending, but that was the first time. This is what I, thought about before I rewatched it. I genuinely have sort of tried to avoid this film for quite a long time because I thought it affected me so badly at the time, but actually I'm so glad you made me rewatch it. It's absolutely brilliant.
It's like you've got PTSD from watching it the first time and then we forced you to watch it again for the podcast.
And I'm really glad you did, honestly.
It's good. I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad as well. Like I think this is one of my all-time favourites. I think it's just a perfect film. Like there's so little you could fault about it, and it's just a great watch. Yeah.
So the story, it's based on the 1992 novel from P.D. James. And I think the story, like this, when this came out as well, it came out in 2006. So that's 5 years after 9/11. So all of that kind of like fear of the other and terrorism and stuff was sort of like very fresh in people's minds still. And I think it's got all of those kind of elements to it. But at the same time, if you look at it from the perspective now, you've got stuff like when Trump famously was on TV talking about Mexicans and calling them rapists and things like that. And just sort of this, there's still that fear of the other and like of that in society. How do you think it feels as a story now? Does it still feel as relevant in today's sort of climate?
It's so weird, isn't it? I feel like you must say this with every film, but the further we get away from this film, I think the more realistic it becomes. It feels, I don't remember it resonating in quite the same way necessarily all those years ago. And now you look at it and think, this isn't futuristic. I mean, actually, it's 2027 it's set, I think. So that's only 5 years into our future now. And it doesn't feel that far off. And that's not necessarily about the themes of infertility, because that is not a problem with a world that is being incredibly, like, more and more like overpopulated. But it is, when you see about the language that is used about, the other, exactly, about people who don't look like us are suddenly, the borders, there are barriers, there are buses taking them elsewhere, there are cages that they're in. We've seen all of those images time and again over the last few years. Now I think, I don't know, now than ever before, or again, is it just because we're becoming more aware of it as we've got older? I don't know.
It's one of the more, definitely the most upsetting aspect of the film is how believable and realistic those aspects are, and how familiar they are, and how little we've moved on, unfortunately, in 15-ish years since the film came out. That's really quite disturbing to see. We've regressed even, haven't we, in the way that our country has reacted to people trying to come in. We didn't treat people like that 15 years ago, but now we're sending people to Africa so they don't stay here. I mean, it's unreal. You think it's unreal. You think it is dystopian. I think this is why I struggle so much with this genre in terms of escapism, because it isn't. Although I do love it. I do. This makes me sound like I don't.
It's that cautionary tale aspect, though, isn't it? Because it's we had Dr. Alan Stroud on the podcast recently, and he talked about the sort of conscience of people when they watch films like this, and the sort of like when something so terrible happens in the world, like Ukraine, and the sort of like you get like a moral conscience of society coming out, and people sort of like talking about it and being upset about it, and sort of like, and that's what this film kind of does as well. It's like it's putting all of that on the screen, and it's got a sort of like a conscience reaction out. It gets that out of you when you watch it.
Yes, which you'd think if it's, a sci-fi or a fantasy or otherworldly or futuristic, that it wouldn't have that reaction. But it's none of those things, really, is it? Yeah, because it's sort of like you said before, it's near future, and they've got bits of sci-fi tech in there. They've got like the little game that the boys playing on, and they've got like the screens are kind of like a little bit futuristic, and they've got like the adverts and stuff. So it's like little bits which are kind of like more relevant now because you can kind of see those things happening, but they're in the background, and that makes it that much more sort of close to the bone. That is fascinating, isn't it? Because they don't go on like the dark web to find each other. All underground groups it's not online. They talk about using mirrors, which is people who speak to other people who speak to other people, like all these links of people, so they can never be traced back to the original source, which you kind of think with any film, that's the thing that dates a film, is the technology and the way that the kind of CGI or the special effects, and the fact that this doesn't have all of that over-the-top technology, the fact that we haven't got just screens popping up into the air or things like that all the time, means that this is very much based in something we know. And I think that's such a clever... It's just a brilliant way of making sure that this won't really get old in the same way.
And there's there is this one very strong sci-fi element, which is the infertility pandemic. That's your science fiction kind of hook in the film, but that's not a stylistic thing like those things that you were describing. It's a thematic thing, and it's just used as like a tool to explain how close we potentially are to tipping over into the edge into the world depicted in the film. Just one major crisis, and obviously we're talking to each other on Zoom because there's been a pandemic, and it's completely changed how we behave in the real world. But it's that kind of...
I also live in Kent, and I think that's why.
True. Logistics.
Day 1000 of the siege of Seattle.
The Muslim community demands an end to the army's occupation of mosques.
The Homeland Security Bill is ratified. After 8 years, British borders will remain closed. The deportation of illegal immigrants will continue. Good morning. Our lead story.
The world was stunned today by the death of Diego Ricardo, the youngest person on the planet. Baby Diego was stabbed outside a bar in Buenos Aires after refusing to sign an autograph.
Witnesses at the scene say that Diego spat in the face of a fan who asked for an autograph. He was killed in the ensuing brawl. The fan was later beaten to death by the angry crowd.
We've seen how close we are to completely changing the way we behave, and it's in a fairly... It's actually settled down for us now in the real world, but in Children of Men, we've got this global crisis that has just toppled most countries, seemingly, as far as we're aware, and pushed Britain to this kind of dilapidated, falling apart, breaking point that we see in the film. But it doesn't feel like sci-fi, does it? You've got that sci-fi element getting you there, but it doesn't feel like sci-fi.
It certainly doesn't now. It might have done, again, when it was made. But do you remember there's also in the film, they talk about Clive Owen, Theo, his character Theo's son, dies from a bird flu pandemic. And that was really... It's in the background, almost. We know he has a son that has passed away with Julianne Moore. So we know that they have a son who passes away. We don't find out the details until, in the background, Michael Caine's character is telling Key about everything that happened between them all. And it's a not quite a blink and you'll miss it moment, but it's just, we are removed from it because we're with Clive Owen's character sort of hiding around the corner, just listening in, eavesdropping. But that is a huge, huge moment because it means for them, they've just had this huge pandemic which has killed people. Again, for us, that is all too real. And then they have this infertility wave, and the two don't seem to be connected in any way necessarily, except that the following year we know is the last. The son dies in 2008. 2009 was the last time a child was born. So perhaps they are interconnected. All these things start going off in your head about this particular pandemic. What is the long-term effect of what we've just lived through? Which is not what Cuarón would have had in his mind necessarily when he made this. But
one impact that, your mind does spin out thinking about the potential long-term effects of our real-world pandemic. But there are real prescient things like this sort of shared societal grief over what's happened, and it's not just the flu pandemic in Children of Men, it's also the infertility. It's more so the infertility, but this shared societal grief that has just shredded a sense of hope throughout the entire country, and it's kind of embodied in Theo as our everyman lead. But I think you can link the dilapidated breaking down of the towns and the countryside with the culled animals that isn't explained.
Oh my God.
That all just feels like this sort of the grief that everyone is feeling is just seeping out and affecting the world. That was the sense that I got from it.
Yes. Actually, the foot and mouth, we've foot and mouth disease, and there were piles of cows and animals that were burning in the same way. So again, these are all images that we've seen on the news in our reality, but just put in a slightly different perspective. The grief thing is really interesting because, we don't, it's not so much good and evil in this film, is it? It's about survival, and even the rebels aren't the good guys. And that's a whole other topic of conversation. But Chiwetel Ejiofor's character says just before he dies that he'd forgotten what a baby looked like, what it sounds like. And that was quite a kind of shocking moment, and takes you back to actually just the weight of what if another child was never born again. You know, that was a real grounding moment, I think, for the film.
Phenomenal delivery from him as well. That the acting in that scene is just, yeah.
I'm so glad he got that scene, because up until then, he's a
bastard.
Yes, but not even, he's a great villain. I mean, what was it? Sunshine? No, what's he in? Oh, the Firefly.
He's the assassin in Serenity.
Yeah, he's so good terrifying. In that. He is terrifying. And in this, you sort of, he's good and then he's not, and then he gets that emotional scene, and you're like, oh my God, this is. Every actor should have a scene like that, I think. Or maybe they couldn't, because they couldn't deliver it as well as he can.
I was carrying the baby up the stairs. I started crying. I've forgotten what they look like. They're so beautiful. They're so tiny. Julian was wrong. She thought it could be peaceful. But how can it be peaceful when they try and take away your dignity? We need him, Phil! We need the baby, we need him!
It's interesting, this sort of like, in this film, it's underpopulation, isn't it? Because in the past in the series, we've looked at a few films which are dealing with overpopulation, which was the fear beforehand that it's just going to get out of control, there's going to be people everywhere, and there's going to need to be some sort of way to drop population numbers, whether that be a Soylent Green scenario, or in ZPG, Zero Population Growth, which we also looked at, they just said you can't have kids for 30 years. And then that's got a similar sort of thing to this, because people go crazy for children in that, because there's a child who is born in that film, and the sort of like, people get obsessed by the idea of a child, and it's this generational thing in both these films and these dystopias that they're sort of dealing with, that sort of the birth of a child is the next generation, you're passing stuff down, and sort of the continuation of the human race. And when that's gone, that's why it seems like there is no hope in this society, because that's why people are going absolutely crazy. There's like people bombing places, and it's just like there's that intensity, because everybody is fearful the entire time. And that's right from the offset, where you've got that amazing long take where you see the people in the cafe watching the TV about the death of baby Diego. And then, Clive Owen goes out, there's an explosion. You know everything about this world within that first scene. It's great.
I literally wrote you know so much in such a short space of time without feeling like it's exposition. And I just think that's the beauty of it. It's so lean, that the way that they write that opening, and it's so satisfying. So we know that the youngest person in the world has been killed. He was 18. So we immediately know that there are no new births, and they haven't been for 18 years. And what a brilliant way of introducing us into this world without having to go through the whole history of what's happened in those 18 years and why. Like, we don't even need to know why.
We've seen so many films this series, dystopian films, where the first thing that comes on screen is a couple of paragraphs, text on screen, explaining why we're in this world, how it came to be, so we can jump straight into the plot. And we've watched a lot of films that I've absolutely loved, but I have never enjoyed the fact that so many of them start with just text on screen. And it's such confident filmmaking to start the film this way. Like you said, you learn it all, but there's no need for any of that text on screen nonsense. There's even an annoying thing where it says the location and the date, but we know the date because the news has already said it, and we Brits recognise it's London, so we don't need to be told it's London. So I was a little bit annoyed at that, but like in a general sense, like he knows what he's doing, he doesn't need it.
In a perfect world, yes.
But it's everything in the film, though, isn't it? It's all of the stuff in the background you just see. Like, there was an advert for something called Quiet Us. Did you guys clock that?
I've written this.
That was, like, terrifying, because it's basically like a euthanasia drug, isn't it? Because things are so bad that they'll just take this drug and kill themselves. And they're advertising on the fucking TV, aren't they? It's mental.
It's that whole idea that what we do in our lives is about passing things down for the next generation. And what happens when you take that generation away? What would we do with our planet and to each other if we don't have to upkeep morals or growth and environment and all of those things? What would happen? That's essentially, right, the question that they're posing. And they even have a bit where, which I think's possibly the most jarring moment, I don't know what you guys think, where he goes to his American cousin's like palatial mansion, who's a politician. I didn't really understand why he was American and a British MP. So I thought that was, but it was about kind of, he's like, who is this for? Who are you passing this down? You know that no one's going to be here in 100 years to see any of this. And it's true. It's they don't care about fucking up the world anymore because there's not going to be anyone left alive to see it.
And he's curating everything as well, isn't he? He's got all this art in this sort of museum almost in his house, and there's something about that in there as well. And just the pig balloon, which is like the Pink Floyd Animals cover, which I found out later on. Like all of these things are just like, there's so much, all the artwork bits are specific pieces of artwork which relate to the story somehow. Like you can find them all online. I don't know them all off the top of my head.
That's so interesting. I didn't realise that they were that significant.
Couldn't save La Pietà. Smashed up before we got there. Pretty rummy, huh?
My mum had a plastic one in the bathroom. It was a lamp.
Good to see you, Theo.
We got to keep Las Meninas and a few other Velasquez, but we only got a hold of 2 Goyas. That thing in Madrid was a real blow to art.
Not to mention people. How's Martha?
She's doing her animal charity thing. Sense of love.
There's a moment later on in the film when they go to the place where all the asylum seekers are kept.
Bexhill, just down the road from me, yeah.
Just down the road from that.
I know. I was like, oh my God, it's Bexhill. That's so weird.
But in that moment, two of the people are posed in the position which is supposed to be like a piece of artwork, and it's like moments like that, which are there's so much attention to detail in there, which is just it's mind blowing.
I mean, I thought they all just looked like the people held at Guantanamo, with the photos that leaked with the bags over their heads.
Yeah, it's all that kind of stuff.
There was a lot of Guantanamo in the Bexhill refugee camp, wasn't there? Wait, would this have been before those photos came out? I don't even know. I don't know what's prescient and what's just reflecting actual stuff that had happened in the news.
Well, that says a lot.
I mean, that in itself is, it's fucked.
It's all mixed up in this.
But you're right, like he just builds worlds so amazingly. And he's obviously, I'm saying it's Alfonso Cuarón who's doing this, but of course it's his cinematographer, it's his set designers, his prop people. I mean, he curates a team, I suppose, around him, and they are all phenomenal because, yes, we know immediately that this is a London that is recognisable, but just slightly off. But you can tell that it's just in the near future. Everything is just that much grimier. But you still recognise these people as well, in their groups or whatever. And even when he gets kidnapped and thrown into a van, literally nobody bats an eyelid. And it's that whole idea of, if you're screaming for help in the middle of London, who's going to fucking come and rescue you? No one. No one gives a shit about you in London. So
because no one gives a shit about anything anymore in this world. Yeah.
And this episode's all about hope, so we're doing well so far, aren't
we? We'll get to it. It's coming. I promise.
But it's also like this film as well, it's been called a modern day nativity story. That's what the words which float around this film. What do you think about that as sort of like a tagline to describe it? Do you agree with that?
It was really funny because she makes a joke. It's Key, isn't it? The girl. She makes a joke about the fact that she's a virgin and his face like, what? It was great. She's not, obviously, but there is a moment when the baby is born, which I think we should talk about that moment anyway, but there's a moment and the sound, the it's like orchestral chorus. I don't know how you describe it, but it's it's really biblical. It's a really biblical moment. And then when she walks out of the building and this tide of people just split and let her pass, and just for a moment, nothing happens. Nobody goes for them. Everyone just is in awe. And I think you can definitely make, biblical comparisons there. It is like the second coming. It's, as shocking as if Jesus had walked again. Yeah.
And they're on this kind of like desperate pilgrimage to have the baby in a certain location, which is very Joseph and Mary on the way to Bethlehem, isn't it? No donkeys,
sadly.
No donkeys, but like you mentioned animals. Something I noticed this time watching it that I found very interesting was that, do you notice that animals love Theo?
Yes,
and that's cat, just like
the dogs.
The cat is jumping up at him, and they make a real point of it with the dog, don't they? He says he doesn't like anyone and he likes you.
Yeah.
And I do not know enough about any religion to know if that means anything in theology, but it has like a mythic quality to it, doesn't it? That he's somehow special. The animals know that he's a special person that will help the mother of the Saviour or whatever.
That's really interesting, because I had noticed but I hadn't connected anything. So yeah, that's really interesting theory. I wonder if there is some sort of we need a religious expert.
We need a theologian.
Yes.
Yeah, it's times like this where I do wish I knew more about religion to know if that meant anything at all. But the message comes across loud and clear, doesn't it? That I'm thinking of like Terminator 2. The animals know who the Terminators are.
Yeah.
Animals just know who the good guys and the bad guys are. They can read you like a book. And I think that's what I'm getting from it. Whether there's a more complex theological element to it or not, I think that's loud and clear.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? It's like the mysticism around it, I think, is so important, just like about both these characters. And I mean, like for me, Key is very well rounded as a character as well. She's not meek as well. She's quite dominant. She stands up to Theo and sort of like and gives him a bit of banter and stuff. And she's like, who's this guy? And she's not afraid to speak her mind. And yet she's in this terrifying scenario where all these people are after her. And it's so foreign to her as well. Like the idea that she doesn't have any concept of getting pregnant. Like nobody at that age knows what it's like. They don't know what would happen to your body and it's all this kind of stuff. It's like all of that element. What did you guys think about her as a character?
I thought she was really funny. She was making jokes, and she immediately sort of ingratiate is the wrong word, but she immediately made herself at home with Theo's family. She starts plaiting his mum's hair, which was really endearing, and it's just she has this natural warmth. She just makes people gravitate towards her, and vice versa. She's actually quite a calming presence as well, and I think she's very grounded, even though all of this extraordinary stuff is happening to her, and you think, oh God, the future of humanity is in the hands of a teenager. Well, what better teenager, really? Because she does remain calm and hopeful all the way through. At the very end, even when we know that Theo has died, she's still talking to him. She's still encouraging. She's still saying, there's a boat. It's Theo, there's a boat. She even gives you hope as a viewer that he might suddenly revive, which it's impressive when we know he's not going to. But it's that optimism that she has.
That you just said she gives you hope as a viewer. That's such an interesting point, because she is kind of like the vessel for the hope in the film. Because really, like, her daughter is sort of technically the vessel for hope, because it's the first baby to be born, but that doesn't work in a narrative sense because the baby's not going to say anything in this film, so it has to go up a level.
But also, we don't know if the baby would be fertile either, but she is, so she is still the hope, I suppose.
Very good point. Very good point. She's more of a beacon of hope than the baby, because we don't know about the baby.
That very weird fake baby,
the digi baby.
Very strange. But yeah, it's also the fact that she has a daughter as well, and the future generations are coming down to women, basically. Women are going to save society. And like Julianne Moore sort of like out there trying to save Key, and sort of like, I think there's something in that. And the fact it's called Children of Men and this world is pretty much fucked at the start, but then the hope comes from the female generation, like the next generation that's going to help things out, hopefully.
There are some brilliant female characters in this. And Pam Ferris, one of your local neighbours, James, I think, from home, right? She lives in Folkestone or Hythe, I think.
Oh, I've not seen her walking about, but now I'll keep an eye out next time I'm back down there. Pam, where are you?
She's so good because obviously she is so famous as the Trunchbull in Matilda, and seeing her as a really nurturing character with dreadlocks. She's a white woman with dreadlocks, but we'll that's you know, it's the future. They haven't got clean water. It's fine.
All the rebels have dreadlocks in this, don't they? Like, there's that other guy,
Charlie Hunnam. Charlie Hunnam has got dreadlocks. I think so.
Oh my God, I didn't recognise him in like.
I think it is. Who plays Patrick? Is it the sort of quite
angry?
I mean,
rebel
we don't.
guy.
He's just this angry, dreadlocked man who just pops up every so often and gets really cross with Theo. Yeah, Pam Ferris is brilliant because she was a midwife. Sorry, not Pam Ferris. Her character was a midwife, and so hearing it from that perspective about the moments where they realised that humanity was faltering I found that completely eye-opening and terrifying because it's all about miscarriage and it's all about very female pain and just the pain of going through a miscarriage and the idea of having to sit with somebody as they go through it, and then for that to happen multiple times a day, and for those statistics to get worse and worse every single day. Women were not giving birth, and she talks about having to give birth at 6 months to stillborn babies, and that's a really difficult thing to hear and to think about generally. It's so frightening, I think, for any woman who has either gone through something like that or wants to have children. The idea of having a baby die in the womb, I think is just like unfathomable pain. So they do a really good job of bringing it back to what that means to the person and not just for the whole of humanity.
But it's doing both of those things at the same time, isn't it? Like it's an amazing scene. I'd say that moment for Miriam is, or rather for Pam Ferris, is as good as the moment you were describing earlier for Chiwetel Ejiofor. You know, like there's so much pressure on her to deliver the emotional weight of what she's saying, but it's also huge narrative backstory that she's delivering for the film. There's so much hanging on that scene, and it's a brilliant scene. Like she just absolutely nails the landing, and it's incredibly powerful, and it's one of the best moments. I think it's more subdued than
yes.
Luke having this revelation about the baby, but
in
terms of performance,
in such a sort of frenetic film as well, I think those moments of just dialogue are just so weighty, aren't they? Because we do have these incredible extended action sequences with explosions and gunfire, and then Cuarón always brings it back to the people. I just think he's a master.
I was 31, midwife at the John Radcliffe. I was doing a stint in the antenatal clinic. 3 of my patients miscarried in 1 week. Others were in their 5th and 6th month. Managed to save 2 of the poor babies. Next week, 5 more miscarried. Then the miscarriages started happening earlier. I remember booking a woman in for her next appointment and noticing that the page 7 months ahead was completely blank. Not a single name. I rang a friend who was working at Queen Charlotte's, and she had no new pregnancies either. She then rang her sister in Sydney. And it was the same thing there.
I mean, he's playing with your emotions, like really expertly, like playing with your physiology. Like you're so worked up from Theo, that, 6-minute sequence. And then that conversation with Luke comes right at the end of that. So like, you know, you're getting some adrenaline going from that amazing sequence. And then you get whacked with that very quiet, very emotional, very powerful moment. Like taking you on that road is really, I mean, it's cruel to do that to your audience, but it's expert filmmaking.
And he's constantly showing you what's going on around you in this film. Like there's that moment where Theo's getting off of a train and then it shows you these people in cages just at the train station. And it's like, it's such a sort of like, we're going to follow the main character, but we're also going to take a little look over here and just show you what's actually going on around him. But like Theo's just kind of like, he's walking along. He's never paying full attention to what's happening, it seems. Like even from the start where he's leaving the coffee shop, he's just sort of going about his thing. He's trying to forget. It's the same thing that his cousin says he does, like that he can only carry on in the world because he just doesn't think about it. He's not thinking about what's going on around him. And but Cuarón is constantly showing you what's going on around you, so you can't ignore it.
Yeah. It's that about the idea, I suppose, of being so desensitized to something, because this has been obviously going on for a very long time for him, for the world. And how much empathy can you have? How much empathy can you give day after day to people whose name you don't know, whose backstory you don't know? And it's, it's a question that it asks of that of us, the audience. There are, unspeakable things going on in the world and sometimes really close to us, but we can't always we don't have the emotional heft to give that its kind of proper place, I suppose, every single time. We just can't. We don't have the capacity as human beings, because then we would be so overwrought and strung out, and then you would want to take that pill that they're offering that will just send you into oblivion, I think.
But in a way, this film is also a story about Theo finding that capacity for caring about what's going on around him, because we're on this journey with him. What did you think about him as a main character, a protagonist, and the journey that he goes on?
You think of him, or I think of Clive Owen as being, quite a sort of heroic figure, I suppose. He's handsome, he's charismatic. You think, he's the leading man, so you think automatically he's a hero. And of course he isn't really for the majority of this film. In fact, there are parts where he just doesn't do anything. He just stands there or sits there in silence. He is almost like castrated in so many ways, and that's to do with, I think, his grief over losing his son, his wife. Literally, it's almost kind of physically rendered in the fact that he doesn't have any shoes for the majority of the film.
Yeah.
Like that, he's constantly crippled by the fact that he doesn't feel like he deserves to be this heroic figure. And it's not until really near the end, I think, that finally kicks in. Yes, he helps them escape, and that's quite a momentous part of the film, and just it takes us on to the next bit. But then he isn't able to save all of these people that you think he might along the way. But he has this bottle of whiskey, doesn't he? I love also that it's not even like a hip flask, like that has some sort of meaning or anything. He just has a Bell's whiskey bottle, which he then fills up when he goes to visit his family. And then he uses the whiskey. You see him drink it throughout the film, but then he uses it to disinfect his hands. And that you see him, I think that's the moment where he finally gives himself over to not having this sort of selfish thing in his mind almost. He's passing it on, he's letting go of whatever it was that was keeping him tied to being an alcoholic, that depression. I don't know, something like that. That's what I was thinking when he...
And he is rewarded with a pair of shoes shortly after that moment, if you want to look at it as a kind of mythic arc that he goes on, after the baby is born and he's finally he's accepted his role as this sort of protector figure, and he's willing to be a bit more proactive about it. Then your mate shows up and gives him a knackered old pair of trainers, and that's his little reward, isn't it?
That's such it's true, because he has flip-flops before
He's
that.
got the flip-flops, yeah.
Well, running around in flip-flops is not the one.
It's not the one. But also, it's a good moment of comedy. Cuarón's not afraid to put in these little moments to lighten it just for a second.
Yeah, and Michael Caine saying, "Pull my finger." up to the very moment of his presumed death.
Yeah.
It's like,
that was...
One thing I did notice as well, don't ever eat an orange in one of his films, because there's 2 moments when they eat an orange and then something terrible happens shortly afterwards.
Oh my God, that is attention to detail, James.
Yeah.
God.
But it's just because like the oranges looked so amazing. It's like a bright orange in the midst of all this like grey and darkness.
She tries to give it to the new baby at one point, and I was like, don't do that. Don't
give her one day old baby.
Like, I think it's implied that they're... So you know when they're at Bexhill and the woman who's given the orange to the...
Right.
So they're supposed to be communists, apparently.
They are, yeah. They've got there's a medallion of Lenin. The camera, as it does in like every scene, pans over some stuff to reveal some exposition, and
that
one of them is
completely over my head.
There's a medallion with Lenin in profile. Yeah, so they are presumed to be former communists,
and they're the ones which are doing well in Bexhill. They're the ones which are sort of like they're in like a nice little flat almost, whereas everyone else is sort of like in these terrible rundown places.
Well, if you grew up behind the Iron Curtain, you might be more well adapted to that sort of place.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't such a nice place to grow up in the kind of latter parts of throughout any of the Soviet Empire, I don't think. That's
a really interesting point, that they had learned from their forefathers as well, how to survive.
Yeah, and it does become like a proper... It's war-torn by the end of it, when all the rebels come in. And we've talked a little bit about the rebels, the fishes, but they are kind of like... They're quite villainous as well. And I think in the other dystopian films we've looked at, the rebels are usually the people which are trying to save the day. They're trying to break down the walls and sort of make the society better. But these guys, they're trying to take advantage of Key and her baby and use them as symbols so they can start an uprising. But they're doing it in such a nefarious way. You don't feel any sort of like... You don't feel positively about these guys, do you?
No, you're not rooting for them, are you? There's nobody really to root for apart from our little band. And that is, you're right, because normally it's weird. The anti-establishment, the anarchists, they're the ones that are portrayed as the protagonists, right, in so many of these, and the antagonists are always at the top. But because the power is so... I don't know, it's sort of metered out in these little worlds, because the rebels, they, like Chotel Ejiofor's group, are pretty powerful. They have they have weaponry, they have cars, they are able to trace them to all of these different places. So they have spies everywhere. So it's not like they're almost the underdog even. We don't really see them enough as the underdog, and that's maybe why that they are on a par with the evil government people who are doing similar things for different ends.
But I mean, the evil government, we see the impact of what the government is doing. We see it on the faces of the Fugees in Bexhill, but they're not personified. We don't have an evil leader. We don't see the Big Brother character or anything like that. Whereas I'd say the fishes are even more villainous than the government is. We see the impact of what the government does, but we have cruel, mean characters trying to shoot our heroes throughout the film in the form of the fishes. So I think they're even more demonized than the government forces by the end of the film. Especially Patrick.
No, Patrick is an underdeveloped character, I would say.
Like the fact they're called the fishes, is that a religious thing as well?
Yeah, I think so. I was thinking about this. It kind of like it muddies the water a little bit in the kind of the nativity story, the modern day nativity story, because fishes, early Christians would use fishes as symbols to like communicate and stay hidden when persecuted. So, and they are religious, aren't they? Like Miriam is very openly religious, although what religion exactly she subscribes to was a little bit unclear to me.
Yeah, she was like a shaman or something at one point with a dead body.
But she invokes
a meditation dance or whatever it was outside.
Yeah. And she wobbled. She got really cross with herself. Yeah. That was brilliant.
Oh yeah. But she calls out to Angel Gabriel on the bus when she's trying to distract the guard. So she's got some sort of Christian ideology in there. And yeah, I have to assume the fishes with a name like that are broadly Christian, or if it's maybe just more of a reference for the audience's sake.
I hadn't thought about that. I was desperately trying to think of what fishes could mean, and I did not come up with that.
Just a
religion
cool
is not
rebel
necessarily
name.
the first places I go to. Also, Matt, why are you saying nativity wrong?
What was that? How did I say it?
Nativity.
How do you say it?
Nativity.
Are they not interchangeable?
I've never heard anyone say nativity before.
Nativity. I'm really thinking about this all week now. I thought they were fairly interchangeable, but as we've established, I really don't know very much about Christian theology.
You're going to get people writing in now being like, no, it is nativity, Rhianna.
Yeah.
What the hell are you
But
talking
they have to
about?
spell it phonetically, which is going to be...
Yeah, don't write in just saying the two words written down. That's not going to help.
It's coming again. Just breathe out and push. Out and push. That's it. Out and you can. Yes, you can.
I fucking can't.
Yes, you fucking can. Come on. Keep. The head's coming out. That's it. You're nearly there. You're nearly there. Just push. Push, Key. Push. Push. That's...
How is he?
So we talked a little bit about the birth scene. Like, yeah, Matt, you were talking about this earlier and you said it seems very quick.
Yeah, I mean, I've not given birth and I'm not a father. But, like, you can't have a baby that fast, right?
But she has been having contractions for quite a long time because she starts having them on the bus that's when Miriam, she's like helping her through her contractions on the bus to Bexhill. So I guess if the baby has been sort of, you know, she's been in labour for quite some time at that point. Her waters have broken on the bus. So maybe it was quite quick, but also it's so gross. You do see quite a lot. Sorry, I shouldn't really talk about childbirth being gross, but it is a bit a lot. But it's more gross the fact that the baby is this weird digital mechanical hybrid. I don't really even... That's the only thing that... And that's quite so near the end that it lets down the look of the film, I think, is having this fake baby.
Quite unfortunate that the baby doesn't look human, given the context of the film. Yeah.
I know.
But surely that must be like, do you think it's a deliberate thing because it's such a foreign thing to this world in this film that they're trying to make a point out of it? Maybe I'm clasping at straws and trying to think of it.
That's very generous of you, James.
I mean, it feels like Cuarón's got everything else handled. So
I think it's more that, like, I think it's a practical issue that there's an obvious desire on Cuarón's part to locate us in space and time with the characters for long durations to make it feel real and make it feel intense. And there are tons of long takes, excellent long takes, some of them very showy and exciting, some of them just very quiet and still so that we can take in the world and learn the exposition that he's not going to tell us in any other way. So I think it just sort of follows along that trajectory of filmmaking, and then maybe you just run into a brick wall of the practicalities of getting a baby actor into the scene with all those moving parts, and maybe a choice you just made to do it digitally, and it looks like bloody it's like Bella's baby in Twilight.
Yeah, it does. Unfortunate. Something we haven't talked about yet is the ethnicity of Key, because we don't know exactly where she's come from, but she's a young black woman and a refugee, and she's the one that's at the centre of all this. She is the hope in amongst the dying planet, and she's black. I think that's a really important choice that they've made.
it's because she is like everything about this is about sort of like again, like I said earlier, the other and the sort of like sense of like there's this very white police state which are in charge of everything, and the fact that it's a black woman who, like, she's got an accent as well, so she doesn't, so she's it's presumed that she's not originally from from the UK, presumably. And
well, she's a refugee, right?
So she's a refugee. And the fact that she is like the hope for the human race is exactly the kind of person which they've been persecuting. That's so important. The fact that she's black, the fact that she's a refugee, and like it's deliberate, and they're making a point. Because, and again, the fact it's a police state is really close to the bone as well, given everything that's happened over the past few years in America.
And they make a point of saying that they could just replace her if the government were to find out about the baby. They can get rid of Key, and they can just replace her with
white woman.
Do they say white woman or do they say black woman?
No, they said white.
Oh, do they? Okay, that's interesting. Oh, that's much worse. I thought they said they'd replace her with just like a British black woman.
No, I'm sure they said white. Yeah.
But yeah,
which is exactly what they would do. You know, if this was like A Handmaid's Tale, for example, that was exactly what they do. So
yeah, the comparisons are definitely there with Handmaid's Tale, because that's the whole thing. They're taking babies away from the mothers, and we'll get into Handmaid's Tale when we do an episode on it before long. But yeah, there's a lot of comparisons to be made between these two films.
She calls her baby Dylan, which obviously great name. And that was really, she's just an incredibly empathetic woman.
Is that the moment Theo dies? Is that like hearing that? Is that him? Is that the moment he just like lets go?
I guess it's the idea that actually his legacy will live on in some way. Because that was his son's name, right? That's yeah. The whole idea of not having anything to leave behind is now changed forever, which is quite a cool idea.
Yeah, but in a sense, he didn't really need that, did he? Like his character journey is the journey is its own reward for him, right? He's rediscovered hope for humanity, and but it's just a nice moment to sort of pinpoint him literally letting go of life and slumping over.
Then you've got the boat tomorrow coming into view.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Oh, that's where the hope is, isn't it? Like, you've got the human project, the mythical human project is there somewhere, which presumably is like some amazing place where they don't have this police state, and like everybody's living a much better life. And it's this mythical place, isn't it?
Well, I think it's very hopeful. But Rhianna, you were saying, the first time you saw the film, it left you devoid of hope. So how did you feel watching it this time when the boat shows up?
It is. I mean, of course, there's hope, but there is always cynicism. I mean, it's a lovely idea, but it's such a fuzzy one in this. We're not really, we don't meet the people that are purportedly going to rescue her. We don't have any idea. It's like with oh god, this is a terrible parallel. Like with Bird Box, we see the sort of end goal of where they get to, the sort of mythical place where everything is beautiful and green, and it is. I mean, it's a slushy ending, but it is a really hopeful one. Whereas in this, she's taking on a journey that migrants have been killed trying to do. I think that's maybe what I'm left with. They're still in a boat. We know, we've seen what's happened to all these people who've tried to make quite treacherous journeys in boats, and I don't know, there is still, I didn't find it perhaps as,
but I think maybe it's not the ending which is hope, but it's Key's mentality, I think, which is the hope for the sort of like
Key's mentality, Theo's mentality, the crowd, the soldiers who put down their guns. That's where hope comes from. Where you're shown that the characters in this world can find hope again. That it just takes seeing a baby. Like the soul of humanity is not completely extinguished, and can't be, hopefully maybe can't be extinguished, or can be reignited, when you're given a reason to hope. That's the message that I was left with, regardless of what that boat's going to do with Key. Because, in a practical sense, why should we trust that the human project has better resources than the British government to research? Or better people, yeah, certainly, yeah.
It's like 28 Days Later, isn't it? It's like you think that they found salvation with Christopher Eccleston and his gang of soldiers, and of course they're like the rebel, they are the bad guys. That's a really good point though about I suppose it leaves you able to make up your own mind, right? It's that classic thing of that could go multiple ways. And I suppose my slightly more pessimistic, cynical brain is going, I don't think so, actually. And then there's this other side of me going, actually, there could be other pockets around the world. We have this little tiny place in London where this miracle happened. There must be so many more of those around the world. That's what I was thinking. So that's another bit of optimism that was perhaps nothing to do with this, which, there could easily be another film of their story. It could be...
Oh, I'd love to see another film set in this universe. Yeah.
Like you talk about sort of like there being like, you've got a pessimistic side as to what could happen with this society afterwards. And I mean, after the baby and Key and Clive Owen have gone, they start firing again, don't they? But I think the thing is,
that's true.
You can't wrap a dystopian story in a nice bow at the end where everything's going to be fine. It's like, even if you look at the world now, like there's always going to be things which keep going. But the main message is humanity there is hope if people have the right mindset and morals behind them. And then we could be all boarding a boat to tomorrow and it's all good. We're off to the Human Project, living a lovely, lovely life.
I can't wait. Sign me up.
Theo? Theo?
Well, I think that about wraps up our chat on Children of Men. Rhianna, it's been an absolute pleasure having you back on the podcast.
Thanks so much. That was really fun. I really enjoyed talking about that. And Alfonso Cuarón is just one of my favourite directors, and it was just really lovely to remind myself of some of his earlier stuff. And he did A Little Princess, which is also a great film. What a versatile guy.
Such a good film. It's great. My funny story, my stepdad almost bought it for me when I was a kid, but because I enjoyed it so much, but I didn't want it as a birthday present. I wanted Space Jam, but because he saw how I reacted to the film when I was watching, he was going to buy it for me for my birthday, and so The Little Princess is a very good film.
It's a really good film. I mean, it's
recommended,
adorable.
Matt. It's a bit of light relief as well in places from our dark dystopian series.
Well, thank you again so much for joining us, Rhianna. Where can people find your work and where can they find you?
I can be found on Six Music every Monday morning with Lauren Laverne. I'm also a co-host on the Radio Times podcast with Jane Garvey, so do have a listen to that. We just review loads of TV and streaming, and I've started on 5 Live as well every Thursday with Nihal 3:00, so have a listen to that for film reviews.
Yes, Nihal. What's Nihal's surname?
Arthur Niker.
He might be in this. The last name credited in Children of Men is radio announcer Nihal, and it might have been that. I can't remember what the surname was.
I heard it and I thought, is that Nihal?
I think it is Nihal.
I think it is Nihal. And then I thought, oh, maybe not. He sounds, but I thought, oh no, he sounds too young. But of course this was made a long time ago. So yes, it was Nihal. How funny.
I did wonder if that was him, yeah.
Wow. Well, I said you can't wrap a dystopia in a nice bow, but I feel like that has just wrapped it in a lovely bow.
It's a small bloody world.
Thank you once again to Rhianna for joining us. I really enjoyed that. I feel like we found the hope, didn't we, James?
I think there was a little glimmer of hope. I mean, I'm not sure Rhianna was fully struck on the glimmer of hope, but I was surprised at how relevant that was as well. It felt very relevant, Children of Men, and scarily close to the bone.
Close to the bone indeed. And next time on the podcast, we are sticking quite close to the bone with some very similar themes, and the hope's just not going to be there next time on the show, is it, James? What are we looking at next time?
So next week on the show, we will be looking at The Handmaid's Tale. We'll be chatting about the book, we'll be chatting about the TV show from 2017, and just how impactful that story is.
And we're going to be joined by author and lecturer Dr. Tiffany Angus to discuss all of those themes at work in the TV series Handmaid's Tale.
Yes, very excited to have Tiffany on the show. We're going to sort of delve into that dystopian world of Gilead next week.
So we hope you'll join us for that. In the meantime, if you want to get in touch with us, you can, as always, send us an email at journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com, or come and join us on our Facebook discussion group, or search for us on your preferred social media, where I'm sure you'll be able to find us.
And if you want to get bonus episodes of the show and support the podcast, you can join our Patreon. So you can sign up to that for £4 a month and help keep the podcast running.
If you don't want to join the Patreon, but you still want to support the show, that's absolutely fine. One way you can do that is to leave us a nice review on your podcasting app of choice. Please leave us 5 stars, of course, and it's always helpful if you put some text in the review as well to help more people find the show. So when you do that, why don't you let us know in your review if you'd be working for the Fishers or off on your own in Children of Men.
Yes, please do. We love to hear from you. Well, that's it for this week. We'll see you again next time.